Go. Today is our study of the lessons for the second Sunday in Lent. Wow, already we're 2 weeks into Lent. This is the Thursday of the first week, and it goes by quicker than you imagine. We just think that yesterday was Ash Wednesday a week ago. So all of our getting ready, our anticipation for Lent, now already we are 1/6 of the way through the entire season. And that is sometimes a little shocking because we thought we had all this time to get ready and all this time to do things. And if you're like me, you still haven't done all of the things, or you haven't started the disciplines and so on. You have a few that are started, but the others are like, oh, well, I'll get to it tomorrow. And as Shakespeare says, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps with steady pace from the first syllable of recorded time. You know, it just sort of sweeps over us. And that's why the theme of our Lenten journey this year is walk with purpose, slow down, take your time. It doesn't mean we're not productive, and it doesn't mean that there isn't an urgency to our spiritual life. It does mean that sometimes we're so wrapped up in what I like to call the tyranny of the urgent that we forget what is truly important. And so that you are here is a sign that you have a bit more balance than a lot of people do about what is truly important, not because I'm leading this, but because we are together going to be looking at the Word of God. So we'll do our usual journey here into, here we go, into our why isn't it working? Making a liar out of me. There it goes. Again, this is the page that we have every week for the lectionary text for this coming Sunday. And there is a link to this page on the main page of our parish website. There are 3 columns. On the right-hand column, the third column over, there's always a link that goes to this page. So if anyone is interested, you can always go there. The second Sunday of Lent is, we start to get into the sort of the meat of what Lent is about. Last Sunday, we, as the sermon made the point, is always the story of the temptation of Jesus. And it gets us fit. And I think that's what I was trying to get across. It gets us fit to realize that we all experience the same temptations to different degree and in different measure and in a different context. But what was being done to Jesus is just, it is part and parcel of being a human being. And so as we go through, then we are now sort of unpacking that. So today, our gospel lesson is from the 13th chapter of Luke. Now we've jumped from the 4th to the 13th chapter. Some Pharisees came and said to Jesus, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." And he said to them, "Go and tell that fox for me, listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures, and today and tomorrow, and on the third day I will finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you. And I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Here ends the lesson. some obvious things kind of stand out. Since I think they're obvious, I hope they're obvious, I'm going to just ask you to tell me what you heard.
He's talking about the end of his ministry.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about, be healing for 2 days, and then on the third day he's going to rest, or what did he say? He was going to
Finish his work.
And that's the resurrection. And then he's also talking about Jerusalem they don't like their prophets in Jerusalem. They don't like any of them, I don't think.
Well, then aren't we all like Jerusalem?
Yeah, that is true. We are, it's human nature not to want to be told what you are doing, but also, and then he's talking about that he won't go to Jerusalem until it's time, and that leads to, the blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord from Palm Sunday.
Right.
So that's my nutshell version.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. What we have today is a foreshadowing of the end of Lent. So already in the second week, we're talking about where Jesus is going, what he's intending to be doing. But it is interesting that, again, the characters, look at who the characters are. Herod. Now, this is not the Herod of the infancy narratives. This is not the Herod of the Holy Innocents that, decreed that every child under 2 years of age would be slain and so on. This is his son. And he is the governor in Galilee, actually, is where he is. And who else did Herod kill? This Herod.
John
the Baptist. So his disciples are seeing the pattern of John being repeated in Jesus. So, speaking, we might put it this way, speaking truth to power is a dangerous thing. And that's precisely what John the Baptist tried to do. Originally, Herod was afraid of putting John the Baptist to death because he also knew that John had a great following, and he might have been afraid of an uprising. But he got tricked into it. That's the story we get, earlier in the gospel narrative, the whole dance of the seven veils, and, Salome and her mother, and their conniving and all that sort of thing. So that Herod ends up not doing the right thing, but doing the convenient thing. The gospel writers tell us that, yes, truly it was politically motivated, but also you can almost see the difficulty in which Herod was placed with John, because he had sworn an oath in his rashness. And the one thing you don't want to do if you are the head of state is make a promise in front of other people and then not keep it. So,
and we're watching it in real time.
Kind of where I'm going with that a little bit. So in one sense, 'twas ever thus. So that what happens is, for example, we can begin to understand why, even though there is tremendous pressure, and we might even feel a morally compelling argument when I had to turn the TV off yesterday. I was watching the news and I just said, I can't listen to it one more minute of the besieged people of Ukraine in a couple of spokespersons who, have been able to get on to the screen. I'm not talking about Zelensky. I'm talking about, some of the other folks that are there, particularly the women who are parliamentarians. And I just couldn't take it anymore. Emotionally, I just couldn't take it. It's not that I don't agree with them. I just couldn't do it anymore, because I also know what the outcome of doing what they really want us to do would be. And in fact, if we study history carefully, we do know that this is how major conflicts begin. It's usually, I don't want to say a rash decision, but a precipitating thing that may not be motivated completely by reason. It also points out the fact that our relationships, particularly on the political level, and I don't mean politics in the sort of popular sense of that, but in just, how do we relate to one another as bodies of people, societies, nations, tribes, and so on, sometimes demand a cold eye, that emotion can be at odds with reason. And I think when we're talking about the expenditure of human life, we need to make sure that that is really well balanced. So from an emotional point of view, for example, I had to turn it off because I would, it was to the point where it's like, oh, please just do the no-fly zone, get it over with, type thing. Because from that side of the conflict, it is the answer to stopping carnage. But the the other side of the decision may end up being immense carnage. And, beyond our imagining. So that what we are placed in is a morally untenable position of saying, essentially, we need to sacrifice these people for a quote unquote greater good. In other words, it's a lose-lose situation no matter what happens. And sometimes we can approach these things very naively, so that when we look at the scriptures in this dynamic that is being set up, when we look at the story of John the Baptist and how Herod ended up putting him to death, what we would, we could condemn Herod right away and say for all the wrong reasons. But from the world's eye, in his view, he had to do what he had to do. There is a movie, I know I've mentioned this before, that came out in the, I would say, early 80s, called The Mission. Some wonderful music. You might know of a piece that sometimes comes out called Gabriel's Oboe. The guy who wrote the musical score for that movie wrote lots of musical scores for great movies, but this is particularly beautiful. And it's poignant. And one of the reasons it's poignant is the movie is poignant. But it's one of those things that they do this sometimes, directors do this. They put in a little piece at the end of the credits that usually when you're sitting in the theater watching something, the credits start to roll, and once the screen goes to black and all, you just see the letters and all that. You usually start to get your jacket on, put your popcorn away, all that kind of stuff, and start to walk out. But if you ever watch this movie on DVD or Netflix or something, watch it to the very excruciating end. And what I mean by that is until there just is nothing more to watch. Because at the very, very end, here's a conceit of the movie. Basically, this is a movie about the conflict between Portugal and Spain in Latin America and the Jesuit missions that were down there. And I can't ever remember which is which, quite frankly, but one of them outlawed slavery. And so the Jesuits, I think Spain did, so that the Jesuits, and there was a line drawn. This is the day when the papacy had this kind of influence among Catholic monarchs. They were fighting each other for elements of the New World, and so there was a line drawn. That's why Brazil speaks Portuguese. But then there were these skirmishes on the edges of things, and the Jesuits who were setting up this mission and evangelizing the native peoples there were working in the area where slavery was not permitted, and they were building this wonderful community. It is a wonderful story about redemption and so on. There's a lot of side stories to it too, but we're not going to get into that. The culmination, the apex of the movie, is when actually the powers that be locally decide to hell with this treaty, and they're just going to come and take the territory. And so the slave, I think it's Portuguese, the slave advocates go in and they destroy the mission. They take the people captive. They put up a valiant fight. It's almost like watching Ukraine happen in front of your eyes. And then, but they are overcome eventually. And the upshot of it was the line that had been drawn had been moved. That's why they came in. And at the very, very end of the movie, you get this sort of, this man, he's actually a cardinal in the Roman Church. He's the nuncio, the ambassador. And he's holding a piece of paper in his hand. And the director has him look from the paper up at the camera. And as he's looking at the camera, the actor's wonderful because he has this expression on his face. What was I to do? He never says it, but that's what he's thinking. That he was in one of those untenable situations and ultimately had to sacrifice the mission. That's why that's called, the story's called, that had been developed for the sake of keeping a broader peace between these two massive nations. Mm. It is almost like a parable of what's going on today. So that I do not want to be in that situation ever. But in reality, we are, because if we maintain that our government is a government of, for, by, and with the people, our leaders make decisions based on what our will is, or they should, or they're supposed to, or at least theoretically they're supposed to. And where are we with that? So that when we start looking now at the Passion of Jesus, we begin to see how relevant this really is. Because we can idealize it and theologize it all about the forgiveness of sin and setting us free from sin and death and all that sort of thing. But it was worked out in real time by real people in real situations. And so when we go in a few weeks to read the Passion narrative, we need to think about what's going through Pilate's head, especially when the chief priests of the people say, if you do not condemn him, you are no friend of Caesar's. That's when he goes back into the judgment seat and condemns Jesus. So that very often good and evil are not as clear cut as we like to think they are. Even the argument is made in the Sanhedrin by, forgot, was it Gamaliel or one of the leaders of the people? It is in one of the gospel narrative. It is better for one man to die for the sake of the people. In other words, let's make him the sacrificial lamb. I mean, that's where that term comes from. So that when we then turn around and we say that as Jesus' disciples, through our baptism, our participation in the Eucharist, we are the body of Christ, where is our willingness to go like Jesus, like the lamb to the slaughter? These are deep questions for us. And this is what really confronts us with the fact that Christianity is not easy. We have made it easy because we've idealized it. You know, again, we talked about this a few weeks ago when we said, oh, he's the most Christian man I know. Well, he wasn't even a Christian. He was a Jew, you know, so it's almost an insult to say that to him because he was living out his value system, not mine.
Well, aren't those values basically the same?
Yeah, well, they were, but see what they were essentially human values from the best sense of what that means. In the sense, you know, he was a good human being and working out of true human, the value of human life, which is part of what we do. But there is that extra element always, which is overlaid for us. And this is the hard part. And this is our Lenten reflection piece. That is that notion, again, I refer to Philippians 2. This notion that Jesus gave up absolutely everything, including his hold on human life. He gave up his divinity to share our life, which included our death. So that when we begin to put things in proper perspective, we begin to see the relevance of our own end, of our own death. And we have to begin to make an account, not of good and bad things, you know, the great accountant in the sky kind of thing, but rather, what is the ultimate meaning of our life? How is the world different for our having been in it? And as part of that, did we simply use the world to advance our own ends? Or were we willing to lay down our life for our friends, as Jesus says, is the ultimate test of love? Soon you're thinking.
I mean, I've just been wrestling so much with this kind of whole issue. I mean, I feel like I'm sitting here watching a movie of a war. I mean, it's like, how can I do this? What am I doing? And I mean, to make a sacrifice to spend more money for gasoline, well, obviously, personally for me, that is not a terrible sacrifice. And I mean, I just wrote a thing this morning thinking, I live in a big house and I have often thought, I have room for a refugee family here. I could absolutely do that. And I feel sincere guilt that I haven't, in the time I've been here, done something about that. And I mean, I sort of hate, I'm frustrated by the remoteness that we have of being in another continent. We're far from this whole issue.
Yeah.
And we kind of expect the Europeans to do more about it. We'll support them, but there's something so wrong with this picture. And have we just become so sort of soft and comfortable in our lives that we're not willing to think about giving up a lot more?
We're at a place where Britain was in 1940 when Hitler was going to invade Poland, and the rest of the world was thinking, well, and Britain too under Chamberlain, if he does that, and maybe we can all avoid the conflict. But Winston Churchill was strong enough to say, if you invade Poland, we'll declare war on you. We're in the same position today that Pilate was in, to avoid an insurrection, to let one man die was to him a small price. And we are in the position right now to sacrifice the Ukraine in order to avoid World War III. And we don't know when the pressure is going to be so great that we have to say, so be it. We have to do something for them. And all of these things are so closely related, and we're witnessing it from afar, like you say. And we have no choice but just to watch. And I don't know what the answer is. It breaks
Keep
my
chatting.
heart.
I can hear you. I just have to step away from the camera for 1 minute.
Yeah.
I can hear you, so keep talking.
Well, I think I've said enough, but as you said, I can't stand to watch it. But I know we should, in order to
Oh, yeah.
have the
Yeah.
full impact on us.
And this is the first time you've really been able to, that, you know, something that our allies are actually, an ally of ours is actually involved in, and we're watching it in real time. But then you look at it and say, well, why didn't we step in and, you know, what could we have done in Syria? What could we have done in Georgia, Chechnya?
Maybe we should have learned something.
We're very, very bad about learning things, aren't we?
Yes.
But I'm
I
afraid
think
that
that's part of
something's
what
going to
George-
happen that just forces us in, that something unintentional is going to happen.
Mhm.
And this comes to the moral question for us. Where is that line? Where, if we can learn from history, as George, brought up the whole appeasement movement in the 1930s, because that's exactly where we were as Americans as well. We were in a faraway place. We had a longstanding tradition of non-involvement in European affairs. It goes all the way back to George Washington, the whole idea of, we are a continent, we are an ocean away from all of that. So alliances only get you into trouble. Some people still think that, and so that's why we should not be in NATO and all that sort of thing. But that's not the world we live in anymore. There is, the First and Second World War dragged us into the modern world with alliances and all that kind of stuff, kicking and screaming, but we're there. And so we cannot any longer imagine ourselves to be in a world that does not exist. The moral question then comes, how much is too much? Sort of the opposite question that I was asking in the sermon last Sunday, which was, how much is enough? But now it's the opposite question, how much evil, violence, just, the suffering that is being imposed on these people, when is it too much to be acceptable? Because what the world needs to do, and that's why I brought that whole thing up about Herod and where we are now currently, is we need always to make the there's always a calculus, because good and evil are not absolutes ever. But the calculus, it has to be, when is evil too great that we need to make a sacrifice? And it's not simply higher prices. I got in trouble for putting a meme up this morning. One of my followers on Facebook got mad at me. It wasn't political. It was, I'm just tired of hearing about all this kind of stuff, blah, 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 blah. Some of us can't walk to work. Some of us can't, I said, I know that, the point is that major changes only begin with small steps. I mean, so those of us who can, should, was my point. And you can't always nuance these things, when you put them up on Facebook, that's the problem. But the reality is that we can't just simply say there is a point that is now undetermined. We have to begin to have the discussion, when is it too much? And I think that's where President Zelensky was coming from a moral calculus point of view. When he was saying yesterday, you will do this eventually. The question is, how many of us have to die first? And I agree with current leadership, and my own personal viewpoint, that we don't get in willy-nilly, just, they attack, therefore we have drawn some red lines to be sure that everybody knows what we're talking about. That's the whole every inch of NATO territory, blah, blah, blah. Well, but then when we look at the moral cost to our souls, what we're discussing, for example, like when I said I couldn't watch it anymore, I had to turn it off. A couple of other comments were made here. That's moral injury. This is inflicting moral injury on us. We are suffering and being traumatized by this reality. Now, some people say, well, that's all very fine and good, but you still have your life, you still have your nice house, you still have your car, you still, all of that's accepted. I'm not saying that it's not, but moral injury precedes the rest. The moral injury had already been inflicted on the people of Ukraine in this 8 years war that they've been doing, with the first invasions in the East. This is the logical outcome of that. So the question for us is, I think, as a nation and as the West, quote unquote, when is it too much? There was an interesting piece published recently by the former Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, who actually critiqued the Patriarch of Moscow for his silence. And what it brought to mind again was the capitulation of the Christian West, the church, in the 1940s.
Yeah.
Where Pope Pius, but not only Pius, but the Lutheran bishops in Germany.
Yeah.
Where the Stadtkirche was set up, and in order to save the church, they acquiesced to the point where there was a special Bible published where they excised anything that was positive about Jewishness. It was just it's really crazy. And so, but then you get the moral heroes of that era, like Bonhoeffer. So I think those are the people that now, if we're looking for moral direction and we're looking at the scriptures to find it, we need to say what they said about these parts of the scriptures. Because they're the ones who've been through, they were the ones who went through that. And Bonhoeffer paid with his life. He was killed in a prison camp. I think it was 3 days before the camp was liberated. And they killed him for that very reason. Is because, they expedited his hearing and all that kind of stuff to make sure he was dead before they got there, because they saw it was coming. And he had been such an advocate against the regime and did so much underground against the regime that they wanted to make sure that he had no power once they lost the war. Think about that. And then think about Jesus. There's another movie, art, something, it can be very instructive. It's Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth. Again, it's at the very end. And Zerah, who is one of the scribes, who's sort of a background character through the entire movie, the soldiers come to report that the body has been stolen. And the Jewish leaders in the circle say, well, it's over with. We don't have to worry about it. And he turns to the camera. Again, it's this sort of Shakespearean aside. And he goes, it's only beginning.
Yeah.
That this is not over with, folks. You think you won now, but this other thing is going to happen. And of course, the idea is that Christianity was born from the death of Jesus. So that one of the things we need to realize is there is always a further horizon, and that the immediate pain and cost, we have to calculate whether it's worth it or not. Is it worth the risk of tactical nuclear weapons, for example, for us to intervene? Is it then worth another level, the risk of intercontinental nuclear weapons? Or will we say it's too high a price to pay? We love the Ukrainian people, but I'm sorry.
What?
Yeah.
And that inflicts moral injury on us. It's an interesting exercise I went through in my work at the VA with the CPE program there, the Clinical Pastoral Education Program. I'm the chair of the Pastoral Advisory Group, which is local clergy and professionals who advise the program. And I went through this seminar on moral injury. And this is what they had us do. They divided the group there, which were the students and the PAG and other people that were participating, into groups of 5. We were split apart and we were given this case scenario. You have been running away from an enemy, an armed enemy, and you have 2 weapons among the 5 of you. And you are confronted suddenly by a patrol from the enemy, and you can't go forward. You can't go back or forward. You are basically stopped in your escape. And there is a woman, there are 2 women and a child, and 2 men. There's 5 people. That's the situation. And the person who confronts you from the patrol says, all right, you, the one with the gun in your hand, kill the other man, and I'll let the child and the 2 women go free. What would you do? See, because that's one of those no-win situations. Can you bring yourself to kill another human being to save what we might consider more vulnerable human beings? Could you bring yourself to do it at all? If you did, what would happen to you afterwards? Not, would they kill you? I don't mean that kind of thing, but rather, if you survive that situation, how would it have impacted you? And I think we're in that kind of a situation now for those of us who are sensitive to the situation around us. Once we make these decisions, we have to live with them. They're not going to go away. It's a funny thing about history. You can't erase it. So we will have been impacted by this, no matter how it turns out. The question then becomes, how do we want to move through it? So when Jesus says, tell that fox for me, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm healing, I'm preaching, I'm teaching. On the 3rd day, it'll all come to an end. and you're Jesus' disciples. And he says, hey, let's go to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
You asked the
Fortunately, they
famous
weren't
question.
smart enough.
You ask why.
Well, but he said, because this is my work. That's exactly what he says. I have to finish my work. On the third day, he says, my work will be done. But he doesn't tell us what it is.
Yeah.
This is one of those things, there's no answer to that question. There are just lots of unanswered wonderings. And it's growing comfortable with that mystery in our lives, which is the challenge of this season for us. When we begin to meditate and think about what it is that Jesus really did, and what does it mean for us who follow? Interesting, soon, that you said about your house and taking in refuge. We actually had, Ken and I had a spontaneous conversation about that last, I think Monday night. So we have a big house, a lot of room. Even the way it's laid out, they could actually have some privacy. There's a bathroom, separate entrance, all that sort of thing. Kind of like an in-law thing. I said, I just came up because I didn't know what else to say. I said, if people were then, brought to the United States, would you be willing to take someone? I don't know if we could do a whole family, but one or two people, mother and a child, whatever. And without hesitation, he said, yeah.
Mhm.
Which I didn't expect, quite frankly. I said, well, we'd have to think about, I was expecting, well, we'll have to think about it, or whatever. He did say, well, we'd have to clean out a lot of stuff. I go, oh, well.
I think most of us would. There's nothing like a vacuum, an empty
Yeah.
space.
Yeah. But, I said, well, yeah, of course, and there's some mechanical problems in the bathroom that I use, which is that bathroom. So we have to have all that fixed rather quickly. But then that's the quote unquote whatever sacrifice we're making in terms of our privacy, in terms of our, the extra cost of having someone else live there, the cost of getting it ready and fixed. We'd have to furnish it, for people to have a bed and or two, or because that's our library now. It's not it's not a residential room. But yeah, we could do that, and we've agreed that we're willing to do that should the occasion present itself. So there are small things we can determine to do that move us forward. So
Something that worries me a little bit about this one is that, I've thought the same thing about Syrian refugees and Afghani refugees and others. And I'm thinking, to some extent, I'm embarrassed to say, it seems like it would be easier if they were Ukrainian refugees, because they'd understand more about how life works here. To do it with an Afghan family, I know somebody who's working with Afghan families up in Maine, and she said it's just a whole different thing, but that's okay, and it would become the most, as she said, it's the most meaningful thing I've done in my later years.
There's a parish in Allentown, Grace Episcopal Church, where they actually took part of their parish plant and created a refugee center.
Wow.
Now, this is several years ago. I forgot who the major group was at the time. I think it was an African group, maybe Ethiopia or something like that. But I mean, but it's still going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I said this to a couple of leaders the other day in the church, in the parish. I said, well, what about the rectory?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We'd have to spend some money, quickly get it. I mean, because it's not in any condition right now.
Yeah.
But get it in shape, clean it up, furnish it. Because we would, at the second floor, even if we didn't, if we just did the second floor, there's at least three major rooms that they could use. There's the bathroom, and of course, then they would have access to what was the housekeeper's quarters, which is the part we have fixed up, the kitchen and upstairs. So that would be another bedroom. One of those could be a living room for them. That kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, we can, and that's the point, is maybe we can't solve the international crisis, but we can begin to exercise that sense of self-giving love that Jesus represents for us.
Mhm.
And I don't think, if I put that out there, I don't think there would be a person, who would question the expense and so on that we were using.
Mhm.
And, if the Red Cross stays downstairs, what better group to partner with about refugees resettlement?
Yeah.
That's not what they do at the Lebanon chapter, but, it's
Yes.
can certainly be a possibility. So I just want to plant those seeds.
Thank you.
All right. Well, any other comments about what we've been talking about?
Now, this is being recorded.
Yes.
And when will that recording be available?
Well, I need to download it. It needs to process, and then I need to put it up on the website, which if I do it today, it'll be a couple of hours.
Because I think it's such a current relative message that we're struggling with here, that this is the very best time that the most people should see how we struggled with it.
Oh, good question. Right. Excellent. Good point, George. Thank you. All right, folks. Well, I will let you go. The day calls. In fact, my phone has been ringing. So that's why one piece I had to get up for a second, and the other is now I just got another phone call that came in, so I don't know what that's all about. So
Thank you.
we'll
Thank
see
you. Take care.
See you in church, hopefully. this weekend.
See you in a couple weeks.
Safe
Oh, yeah,
travels,
okay,
Kathy.
well, travel safely.
Yeah.
Travel
Except,
grace.
I honestly feel guilty right now about spending the money to go.
we